Thanks. What's happening, guys? Woo! All right. So, what do you guys think so far? You've heard some really cool stories, right? Can we turn the music down? There's been some great stories. Have you guys kind of seen the connections and the stuff that we were talking about this morning in regard to like some associations, conditioning, how we conform, and then how we make decisions to change? Right? Everybody that's come on this stage at some point in their life said, I have to change. I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to change my life. So I had showed you earlier, just real quickly about, I showed you a picture of me when I was very young, and then how the next thing I knew, it felt like I was in prison, San Quentin prison. And I want to tell you a little bit more about how that happened for me. And my hopes is that when you hear these stories, that you'll look back at you and some of the challenges you may be living, or some of the roadblocks that you may be living, and be able to confront them and change them. So throughout my life, give me the first slide, please. Throughout my life, I always had what I would call the brick wall as a block. Roadblock, can't gain any ground, a brick wall. I saw this wall in my life for almost 30 years in anything that I tried to do to progress in my life. And where it started is when I was 7 years old. Up until I was 7 years old, I lived with my mother and my father and my siblings, and we were very close. And I was very close with my father, like I mentioned earlier. And one day I came home, and I was home. I was in the garage playing with my father, and my mother came home. And she says, get in the car, son, we're going to go for a ride. So I said, okay, it wasn't a big deal. We lived in San Jose, California is where I grew up. And all our family lived around us within a couple of miles, so it was very common to go for a ride. I got in the car, said bye to my dad, and we drove off. The next thing I knew, I was on a plane headed to Alaska. And I didn't think much of it. I was excited. I saw the airplane. We got to Alaska, all the snow. It was fun. And then a day goes by, and I asked my mother, where's my father? Where's my dad? Where's my daddy? And she looked at me, and she just shook my entire life for the next 30 years. And it wasn't purposely, like I said earlier, I love my mother. She did what she knew how to do. But she looked over at me, and she said, don't worry about your father. You're not going to see him again. And it shook me, literally. I felt like I didn't understand any of the emotions that I was going through. What's real important for me is understanding and expressing your emotions, but at that age, we don't know. I meet adults now. Some of my clients, some of my one-on-one clients don't know how to express their emotions, don't know what their emotions are. So I didn't know what I was feeling. Looking back, I was hurt, I was in pain. I went into depression, I had anxiety, just all these different buildup of emotions inside of me, and my 7-year-old little body didn't know how to do it, didn't know how to deal with it. So being there in Alaska, I started to cry every day, uncontrollably. I just couldn't control myself, imagining, what do you mean I'm never going to see my father again? I mean, have you ever heard something that you couldn't even comprehend? You're like, what? That wasn't even a thought that I could even imagine that it could even happen. And I would cry every day, and at school and everywhere else. And I remember going onto the playground at school in the mornings, and people would start to laugh at me, other kids. Kids are not nice sometimes. They would laugh at me. They would make fun of me. I'm the kid who cries all the time. And one day I made a decision there. And I remember I looked up at these kids, and I thought to myself, I'm never going to cry again, and I'm never going to let anybody laugh at me again. And I felt, looking back, I felt my heart harden. And no more was my life the same. No more was I a little kid playing. And from there, we did come back, and I got to see my father, but over the years, I realized why she had taken me from him. He had addictions, he had challenges, he had a lot of problems that it wasn't for a kid to be around. And my mother had experienced and lived it. I didn't see it as a little boy. I just saw this wonderful man who I loved to death, who was my father. My father ended up passing away really young, 47 years old, based on his lifestyle and his addictions. Going back from 7, that traumatic event for me tore me apart. And what it did, it led me into this weird life of fog that I had mentioned. And by 9 years old, I was doing drugs. At 13, I conceived my first child. And then at 14, I got incarcerated. And I'd spend the majority of the next 10 years incarcerated, either on the streets or incarcerated. I got out of San Quentin prison when I was 24 years old. And that's when I kind of made a decision. Well, actually, while I was in prison, it's a wild place nobody wants to be. I don't know if anybody's ever been there, but if you have, you know. It's nowhere for anybody to be, especially from this little loving child to the transformation that happens. And I made some decisions, and I said, this is not the only life. For so many years, I thought it was. This is not life. There has to be more than what's happening to me and the way that I felt, the way that I act, the things that I do. There has to be more. So I kind of went on a journey, and I started discovering psychology. And my first psychology class, actually, Psychology 101, it changed my whole life again. It was another shift for me, because in Psychology 101, the basis of psychology, there are, you're studying, it says things like, if you grew up like this, you might feel like this. And I was like, ooh, there's an answer to why I feel the way I feel. If you do things like this may have happened to you. Oh, there's an answer to why I do these things. So once I learned that, I just dove in. I studied psychology everywhere, all the way to Stanford. It was life-changing for me. But still, I had this brick wall. I had this brick wall in any successes that I would start to have in my life. I would hit this wall, and I didn't know how to get around it. So I started seeing psychiatrists, seeing coaches and different things to try and heal, I think, is what came next. Because I understood the psychological side of me. I understood there were reasons why I was doing what I was doing, acting the way I was acting, feeling the way that I was feeling, but there was something else because I wasn't healed yet. So I started going to church, and I discovered an amazing pastor. I met an amazing pastor, and he told me, learn to quiet your mind. And that's like the meditation kind of we did earlier. I learned to quiet my mind. And when you quiet your mind, you can hear from above. And you'll get the answers that you're seeking. So one day, I have a spiritual experience that completely changed my life. And can you bring up that brick wall again, please? So this is how I lived in anything that I did. And while I was seeing this psychiatrist, I saw some top-notch psychiatrists, and they would say, what is with the wall? They were trying to get it out of me. What is with this wall? And I said, I don't know. It's huge, and I could never see around it. I said, as time went by throughout the years, it's almost like it got smaller, but it was still there, and I could see over it. And the psychiatrist asked me, well, what's on the other side of the wall? And it's almost like I could see it. And I would just look, and I'd go, I just sense freedom. I see a field, beautiful field. I see trees, and I just sense freedom there. And she gave me some metaphors. This is some of the stuff we do in coaching. She said, can you put a ladder on the wall, climb over the wall, and be free? And I said, I can picture the ladder, but I can't get over it. And then she said, well, can you put a door? Picture a door in that wall and walk to the door. And I said, I can picture the door, but I have no key. I can't get through it. I can't get past this wall. So with continued work and quieting my mind and being able to listen to self and from above, one day I had an experience, a spiritual experience. And it was as if I left my body, because where I was is the same as if I'm standing here right now. And I ended up, next slide, I ended up in the field, that field that I could see over the wall. I was standing there, and I looked, and I was shocked. The wall was gone, but I couldn't move my feet. And I was excited. I couldn't move my feet, and I was like, oh, there's still something wrong. And I look over, and I see a little boy who's 7 years old. Next slide, please. That's me. And I look over. This is hard for me every time I tell this story. I look over, and I see me standing there, 7 years old, just like that, really calm, just like looking at me. And my first instinct was anger. And I looked at him, and I said, you're my wall? All these years, you've been holding me here from going forward? And he looked back at me, and none of this was verbal. I mean, it was me, so we're just like thinking, I guess. But he looks back at me, and he goes, I'm not holding you here. You're holding me here. And as soon as he said that, I'd realized that my entire life, all the streets, the prison, the masks, the depressions, the anxieties, I'd realized that I'd created that because I'd put this little boy aside. And that day back on the playground, when I hardened my heart and said, I'm never going to cry again, I'm never going to let anybody pick on me again, I created this alter ego. And I put this boy aside. And all these years that I was trying to get free and past this wall, it was him going, hey man, I'm right here. Let's live. Let's be happy. Let's be joyful. So I look at him when he says that, and I just feel this wave of energy and understanding and love. And it's overwhelming. I can feel it while we're both standing in this field. And I kneel down because now I feel bad. And I kneel down and I start to hug him. And I start to just pour into him. And I don't even know where the words are coming from, but I'm saying, I love you. You are happiness. You are joy. I'm so sorry. You are light. You are joy. You're the light of the world. And I'm just pouring all this love and light into him, and I'm apologizing to him for holding him all those years. And then all of a sudden, I start to call him son. And I'm holding him and saying, I love you, son. You're amazing, son. You're the light, son. And at the same time that I'm saying this to him, I'm thinking, this is not my son. This is me. And then everything shifts, and I feel my father, who had passed many years earlier, holding me, holding us. And now he's speaking to us. And he's saying, I love you, son. You're amazing, son. And he's pouring into us. And it was just life-changing and understanding and healing. That's the key in this, transparency, acceptance, and growth. It was healing. I had understood the science, the biological, the psychological, but this was the healing part, the spiritual part that we all need. And then everything shifted one more time from us three embracing and just loving each other and pouring to each other. We stood up, and it came from above. It was like an energy coming down, and it was God, and he was saying, I love you, son. You are my son. You are joy. You are light of the world. And he didn't say that to me, but he said it to us, to everybody. He's saying, you are the light. You don't need to live sad. You don't need to be depressed. You don't need to have anxiety. That's not what you're created to be. And right there, I knew that the life didn't happen to me. It happened for me. And I wouldn't have gained the wisdom that I had. I wouldn't have studied the psychology that I did. I wouldn't have gone so deep and learned all these things if that life hadn't happened for me. And that's why we're here. That's what Tag Talks is all about. That's why we're here today. So the next thing I realized, the little boy is in my hand. And I'm looking. And all the pain, all the sorrow, all the loneliness for all the years that was there, I took him and I put him into my heart. And I don't know what prompted me to, but it's just I put him into my heart, and my heart softened again. And during those times is when you realize that it was even hardened. You know, we connect the dots by looking back. We can't look forward and go, what happens next, what happens next? We look back and we go, oh, I understand that now. So what has happened to us is very important in our lives. So I put him into my heart, and then he appears in front of me. And I look at him and I go, you're free. He was the one who needed that field. He was the one who needed to be free. And I said, you're free. You can go. And he looked at me, and he started to walk into the field, and he hesitated and he stopped. And he kind of turned around and he looked at me. And I looked at him and I said, you're free. You can go. But then I also realized that that's me. The hesitation is not him, it's me. And I said, no, and to myself, I said, you're free, you can go. And the little boy ran into the field, and the freedom was there. And that's what I want for everybody